Hey everyone, it's Claire Rogers. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. So this week I want to talk about the importance of validating and owning your story. Now you might be wondering, well, what does that mean exactly? So let me give you an example from my own personal life. So most of my life I have been a socially aware individual, or I like to think so anyway. I'm very up on current events. I'm really into politics and understanding how the world works. And as a consequence of this, I am very aware of the injustices that are taking place in this world. And as a result of this, I would compare and contrast what I would see on the news or in society as a whole, and I would invalidate and decline to acknowledge how I was feeling. So I used to have a great high profile job that paid me loads of money, but I hated it with an absolute passion. It did not fill my soul. Yet I didn't empower myself to make changes because I would compare my life to somebody else's. For example, somebody who's homeless in the street, or somebody who is living in a war torn area, or a refugee somewhere. And I'd say, well, what right do you have to complain, Claire? You have nothing to complain about. So shut up and put up. And as a result of this, for years, I would deny my feelings, which would paralyze me from making any changes to my life. And then I learned after many years that actually you can't rewrite the next chapter of your life if you deny your story. So it's really important that we acknowledge the obstacles that we've overcome. It's really important that we acknowledge our feelings in order to make changes towards our life. And it's also really important that we don't allow other people to invalidate our story. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, when I was just starting out as a keynote speaker, I attended a writer's retreat in Los Angeles for a book that I'm writing or continue to write. And part of the exercises on day one were we had to stand in front of an audience of about 20 or 30 people and be recorded reading 5 or 10 minutes of the book that we've written. And my book is all about the panic attacks, anxiety, and depression that I fell into in 2013. And I was really scared to share my story in a public forum. Um, and so I got up in front of the group of people, and my hands were actually visibly trembling when I was holding my paper. And I remember thinking, oh my God, you're going to tell everybody about what happened to you. People are going to judge you. People are going to think that you're a little bit crazy or that you lost your marbles. But I somehow got through it. I stood there in front of the class and I told a really raw story about one of the worst panic attacks I ever had, where I ended up curled up in a fetal position on my bathroom floor, trembling in fear, willing this panic attack to go away, convinced, absolutely convinced that I was going to die there on my bathroom floors. And it was a really raw and authentic moment to share. But I finally managed to get it out. My voice stopped cracking and I was able to get through it. And as I walked to go and sit down, I was overcome with praise and clapping from the audience members who really enjoyed what I had written and what I had said. And I was feeling really good about myself because I thought, well, wow, I've just shared a really raw and authentic moment in my life. And people resonated with it, which means that they themselves may feel empowered to share their own story. So I felt really good about myself. I was like, okay, awesome, I'm onto something here. And while I was feeling really good about myself, a voice popped up from the back of the room who said, well, I don't understand what your issue is. There's nothing wrong with working. There's nothing wrong with corporate life. I think that you were just a bit weak by having panic attacks. And those words crushed me, absolutely crushed me. And I went back to how I'd originally felt of deny your story, invalidate it, because she's right. Maybe there are other people that are having a harder time, and maybe I was just weak. And while I was having these moments of self doubt, not concentrating on the 20 or so people who were actually supporting me, but focusing on that one person, I'm pleased to say that the rest of the audience actually jumped to my defense and said that they thought that I was really brave. And I had to get over myself essentially, because I was at that moment really scared and thought, you know what, well, I'm not sharing this story anymore because I've been judged. But I had to get over it because actually 5 days later, I had to do one of my very first speeches in front of 500 people telling that very story. So I had to get over myself. And the reason why I'm telling you this is that it's important that you do not allow other people to invalidate your story just because they can't relate to it. They can't relate to it, and that's okay. But there'll be other people who can relate to it. So long as you can relate to it and you can acknowledge your story, you're good. So you might be asking yourself, so how do I own my story and how do I validate it? So I want to give you a couple of questions that you can think about. So one of them would be, what are my feelings? How am I feeling about my life? Am I denying my feelings? Do I acknowledge how I feel? Do I put other people's thoughts, feelings, opinions above my own? These are just some of the things that you can start to ask yourself. What does your gut tell you about your story? Now, I'm not saying that you have to share your story in a public forum like I do. And a caveat there, I didn't start sharing my story for a couple of years after I recovered from my anxiety and depression. So there's a caveat there. It didn't happen overnight where I just automatically started talking about my feelings and my story. And you don't have to do that in a public forum. The most important thing, though, is to recognize how you're feeling and acknowledge your feelings. Don't deny your feelings, don't deny your story, and do not allow other people to invalidate your story or your dreams or whatever you may want from life. Your story matters. So now I want to talk about how by owning and validating your story, you can turn it into a positive to reframe your story to that of empowerment. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at your existing story. You're going to try to ascertain what your key learnings are from that story. Then you're going to look at what the opportunities are. And then finally, you're going to think about, well, what would the obstacles be if I didn't change my story? So let's use me as an example again. So my previous story was that I was a people pleaser seeking approval who had awesome work ethic, but I took that to the extreme and worked every hour under the sun because I was seeking approval. That was my previous story, and I acknowledge that. The key learnings from this are I discovered that yes, indeed, I was a people pleaser. I'm not a people pleaser at all anymore, or to a degree I am. So, yes, I learned that I was a people pleaser. I also learned that I was seeking approval. And as such, I worked every hour under the sun because I was trying to fill a need internally. Those are my key learnings. From that, the opportunities are I could then work with a coach to understand where this chronic need to please and this chronic need for approval came from so that I could change that to be more empowering, to actually serve myself rather than constantly looking for approval from others. And finally, I was able to determine what the obstacles would be if I didn't change this behavior. So the obstacles were that if I did not change this approval, I would not be living a life of authenticity. I would be living a life of seeking approval from other people. And that is how you reframe your story by owning the existing story, understanding what the key learnings are and the opportunities, as well as what your challenges are if you don't make changes. Now, I hope that makes sense. I have really condensed that down into just a couple of short minutes there. But if you do have any questions, then please leave some comments below and I will endeavor to get back to you as soon as possible. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my channel and tune in next week for the next video. I wish you a great week ahead and don't forget, validate your story. Take care.